Three. Here we are. I'm working. Good evening and welcome to Empower You. This is the first class of our 18th semester. It's good to see so many of you here. Did you enjoy your summers off? I did, but I'm glad to be back. We've got a lot of exciting classes. Every time we do a schedule, I think, how are we going to top this next time? And then we get together and we come up with our ideas, and I think we top it, or at least it's just as good. Dan sends his regrets that he could not be here tonight. He's actually working underground on that Ukraine story, so he can't get back with us this quickly, but he'll be back next week. That's meant to be a joke if you took me seriously. I don't know if there's anybody new here tonight, but Dan he's the reason for Empower You, the reason it happens. It was his vision. He wanted to help people to become more knowledgeable and empowered to, in your lives, to learn more about things you don't know, and to, when you're knowledgeable, then you're not so timid about speaking up and giving your opinion on certain subjects and things. So tell your friends about us. We do have an extensive mail list, but it still helps for you to reach out for people that don't know about us. We do live cast almost all of our programs. So at a later date, if you want to go in and watch it, you can, or you can tell your friends too. If they don't want to, some people think this is too far to come. And if you're on the west side, or we do have somebody from Kentucky here. I don't know how much further you could come. So, but anyway, they can always have the choice of watching it online. We do like to get your feedback about our programs, and we also like suggestions for future classes. You can go to empoweruohio.org and leave that information there for us. We're also powered by donations only. So we do pass around our little red buckets at the end of towards the end of the class. And if you'd like to give any donation to help keep us going, we do appreciate that. And also during the class tonight, our speakers would like to take questions during their presentations. So if you have a question, just raise your hand, but please wait till I get the microphone to you so that everybody in the room can hear your question, and especially those online, so they can hear your question. And next, I'd like to just tell you about a few of our upcoming classes. Thursday night, if any of you were here back in May, the early part of May, we had Al Tufarber here talking about the Democratic Civil War in the 2020 election. Well, Al's going to be back with us Thursday evening talking about China. How many of you worry or think, whichever, I don't know if you worry about it, but how many of you think that China is going to overtake the United States and be the #1 power? Yeah, we have a few people. Well, Al's going to tell you you don't need to worry about it. So be sure you come to that class, because there's all kinds of reasons why China's not going to become the United States. And then next Tuesday, John Newsom, who's a retired detective, is going to be here talking about cold cases. He's going to tell you what the police go through, and it's probably not quite like CSI, but maybe a little bit, I'm not sure. He'll be talking about some of the cases that he himself has had, and some of his cases have been on 48 Hours Mystery. They've been on The Stranger Next Door, and I forget the other one, Dateline maybe? Anyway, he's going to be here talking about those. So that'll be a real interesting class. We have quite a few people already signed up for that. I think there's a lot of us that get intrigued by that mysterious stuff. Next, we have a door prize to give away. Don, would you bring me the tickets up here, please? We're giving away a combat application tourniquet tonight. This was given a donation to us by Bob Kudajar, who is actually going to be teaching a class for us next semester. So Don's not here tonight, but thanks to Don, we have this to give away. So get your tickets out. The last 3 numbers, 990. 2990. Nobody has that? Okay. Wait. The last 4 numbers, 2990. Nope. Going once, going twice. Here we go. 2980. Here we go, Georgia. Now, don't worry about knowing how to use that because it's going to be demonstrated for you tonight. So when you leave here, you're going to be an expert. You can go home and practice with that. Now I would like to introduce one of our speakers. Gina Menninger is the Trauma Prevention and Outreach Coordinator for UC Health in the University of Cincinnati Medical Center. Gina has been a nurse for 13 years, with the majority of those years with the trauma department at UC Medical Center. She graduated from the University of Cincinnati College of Nursing with a bachelor's in science and nursing in 2006 and is an avid Bearcats fan. Gina is the mother of 3 boys and enjoys coaching them in sports and helping out at their school. She serves as a representative with the Ohio Injury Prevention Partnership for the state of Ohio and is part of the American Trauma Society, Trauma Center Association of America, Midwest Injury Prevention Coalition, and both Butler and Hamilton County Safe Communities Coalitions. The #1 cause of preventable death after injury is bleeding, and education early on will prevent the statistics from continuing to trend up as trauma continues to be the leading cause of death for those aged 1 to 40 and third leading cause of death for all ages. While mass shootings currently receive a lot of attention, serious bleeding is more likely to result from everyday injuries, such as those that may occur at home, at work, or while on the road. Please give Gina a warm welcome.
Thank you so much. We are so excited to be here with you guys tonight to bring you Stop the Bleed. So Stop the Bleed is a bleeding control course that is actually offered throughout all of the United States, as well as outside of the United States and other countries as well. Today, I have with me Jenny Brodsky. She is the Trauma Program Manager for Westchester Hospital, a level 3 trauma center here in Cincinnati. And we have Dr. Chris Janowak. He is one of our trauma surgeons that works down at UC Medical Center as well as out at Westchester Hospital. So this class, just so you guys have a little understanding, is again, just the basics of what you would need to know to control a life-threatening bleed or uncontrolled bleeding outside in the community. This is not a certification. There's no test at the end. And most of this information is pretty basic knowledge. For the most part, it's probably something you would already do in the event there was an emergency. What this class is really about is empowering people who are there during the event or when it first happens to act before first responders get there. And that is our goal. And Chris will tell you a little bit more about the program and why it was started, but just so you have the basic understanding that this isn't hard stuff. So please, if you do have questions, raise your hand, because if you have one, probably everybody else has the same question or is at least thinking the same thing. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Janowak now.
I wonder if I should use that. We're going to try the televangelist mic for a second. I must have the wrong shaped ears for it because it seems to fall off my ear every time I open my mouth. So we'll see if we have to go to the mic. First off, my name is Christopher Janowak. I'm one of the trauma surgeons at the University of Cincinnati. I split my time between University Hospital downtown, which is our level 1 trauma center, and Westchester Hospital, which is a level 3 trauma center. Before we get into our main talk tonight, I think it's a reasonable thing to kind of explain what a trauma center is and what a trauma surgeon is. Because after doing this a number of times, it seems that one of the big questions we get is, now what do you do? So I'm a general surgeon by training, and 16 colleagues of mine are specialists in taking care of the worst injuries that there are. Stabbings, shootings, car accidents, the worst sort of injuries that happen, that come to the hospital. Oftentimes you will meet one of us. We are there to take care of anything that you need, to get any sort of consultants that you need, subspecialist, orthopedic, neurosurgeon, whatever have you. But one of the things that we are charged with doing is doing something about trying to prevent injuries. Because at a certain point, we can't do anything more to make people get better faster. What we really have to do is we have to try to reach out into the community and try to start preventing injuries. And if not being able to prevent injuries, trying to make some of these injuries so that people can survive them. Unfortunately, there's not enough of us to be out there on the street corners. And to be perfectly honest, if I'm driving home tonight, I'll be just like any one of you. And if something happens out on the road or on the side of the street, I'll be getting out and I'll be just like anyone else coming up to that patient or that person who's out there in the field, and I'll be a first responder. So this is really part of a first responder type course. And I'm glad that we have a wide range of different people here in terms of ages and experience. And I'll get to that in a little bit of about why that is, because some of the experience that we've learned over the past 40 to 50 years, especially since Vietnam, since Operation Desert Storm, and since Afghanistan, has really influenced what we can do in order to help the injured patient here on the civilian front here at home, okay? And so with that as kind of a background, what we're going to be talking about this evening is a course designed by the American College of Surgeons and their Committee on Trauma. It's called the Bleeding Control Basic course, also known as Stop the Bleed. What we're trying to do is we're trying to teach how to control life-threatening bleeding so that that person that you are helping, or even if it's yourself, can make it to see me, and we can sort out how we can fix this injury, okay? This is something that has been in the works for a long period of time. It's a number of different organizations that have put their heads together. It actually came on the heels of one of the worst national tragedies that we had, which was after the Sandy Hook shootings. At that point, Presidential Council was put together calling in trauma professionals from the American College of Surgeons, law enforcement professionals, military professionals, and asking what can we do to try and improve the survival of these devastating injuries. And they came up with a number of things, and actually this course is only one avenue of an offshoot of those courses. And it's a way to train the everyday first responder on how to address something that you'll see that not many of us have seen or encountered otherwise, and what to do in that situation. Ultimately, this course is focusing on how to save a life. This is life-threatening bleeding. And there may be some graphic images that you might see here, because ultimately what we have to talk about is we have to talk about bleeding and blood. I will be sure to warn you as those are coming up, but bear in mind that those are fundamental to this presentation. And the goal of this sort of course is that with the right training, you can be the person that is saving the life, okay? So what are these injuries? Well, we think about things in our own backyard. We think about these mass shootings, the Cami nightclub, the Fifth Third shootings. These are things that are happening in our area. But these are also mundane things. This is the person who falls off of the roof and lands on a branch and gets a terrible cut because of that. This is a person who gets into a highway speed motor vehicle accident and perhaps has a leg that's been amputated from that accident. This is somebody who's working in their home shop, just like what happened yesterday afternoon, and comes in with a table saw injury to their leg. This is somebody who is maybe in this room. This is somebody who lives next door to you. This is somebody in your community. These are happening every single day. To make it a straightforward and simple course, we want to reduce it down to the ABCs. And for this course, the A's are alert. So the first thing we want you to do is we want you to get help on the way. Yes, you are the first line, but you have to have someone coming behind you to come kind of scoop up this patient and bring them to the hospital where they can get definitive care. B is bleeding. You got to find where we're bleeding. We'll talk about that in a bit more depth. And then C is to compress and control that bleeding. This includes covering the wound, putting the appropriate amount of pressure on it, using a tourniquet if that's appropriate, and or packing the wound full of gauze. And we're going to go through all of those in detail. First and foremost, before any of those ABCs, you have to be safe. And this comes actually out of military training. Was anyone here in the military? What they teach nowadays, since Operation Desert Storm, when we have our men and women in uniform out in the field in a firefight, and we have someone who's injured out in the field, they say, first and foremost, you need to make sure that the scene is safe. Because the worst thing than having one injured person is to have two injured people. And so if you're going to be approaching someone who has an injury that you're going to assess for life-threatening bleeding, you want to make sure that scene is safe. That means if the car's on fire, you wait until that fire is controlled. That means if there's downed power lines that are in water, you make sure that those are controlled first. That means that the scene is safe. If there are bullets flying around, you take cover. Once the scene is safe, then you can go and help someone who is in need of help. This also means a second thing. This also means that you're dealing with blood. And bloodborne pathogens is a significant concern. And so when we're going to talk about some of these bleeding control kits that either you can make or that we're starting to show up around the community because of efforts made from some of our local agencies, those kits are going to have personal protective gear, or they're going to have things so that you can protect yourselves, such as gloves or masks or other sort of things. If you are exposed to blood, which you may be by trying to help a person who's in need of your help, you need to let those first responders that show up, you need to let those law enforcement or EMS that show up, you need to let them know that you have been potentially exposed as well so that you can be taken care of if that need should arise, okay? All right, going back to the ABCs, alert. First and foremost, this seems straightforward, but call for help. Since the mid-1980s, since the legislation was put through to standardize the EMS system in the United States, we have made great strides in terms of being able to activate our emergency medical services and law enforcement through the 911 system. If you see someone who has been seriously injured and you think nobody else has been notified, take out your cell phone, call 911, tell them what's happening, and get someone else on the way as backup as you're then going in to go and take care of this patient. Secondly, bleeding. So bleeding is one of those funny things. In a state like Cincinnati, where we're far enough north to have true winters, you know, injuries can happen even when people are not just outside wearing their bikinis around the pool, right? They're fully clothed, they might be under multiple layers of clothing, and that clothing can definitely hide where the bleeding is coming from. Sometimes, to identify that life-threatening source of bleeding, you have to start to remove that clothing. So another nice thing to have, and something that I keep in the trunk of my car, is a utility knife or a scissors that allows us to take off that clothing and find out where this bleeding is coming from. Telltale signs that life-threatening bleeding might be happening: blood that's spurting. There are two types of blood vessels that you have in your body. You have arteries and you have veins. If an artery is cut, you can bleed to death from that sometimes in minutes. And that is pumping with every heartbeat, it is going to be spurting. That's a telltale sign that that is emergency sort of bleeding. But venous bleeding can also be significantly life-threatening as well, as long as it continues without being checked. That's blood that's pooling. It could be darker. It's not necessarily the bright red blood that we're accustomed to seeing. And that could be as telltale as a pool of blood on the ground or clothing that's been soaked through with blood. Other sorts of things that might clue you into this patient having life-threatening bleeding: big, deep lacerations where you can see muscle through that cut, or even something where they're missing a limb, digits, arm, leg, something like that. Sometimes those wounds in the heat of the moment might not actively be bleeding, but are significantly concerning for starting up bleeding while that patient is being moved to the hospital. And so sometimes it's a matter of getting good compression, getting good control of those areas before they start bleeding. The long of the short of it is bleeding can happen from any sort of big type of injury. What you're seeing on the screen right now is actually a pig model, but it's a video that kind of shows what we're talking about with this squirting sort of pumping bleeding, or a big wound where the arm or leg is flayed open like it's gone through a piece of plate glass or something like that, and you have lots of exposed muscle or tendons. The wounds that can lead to death from bleeding, these come in a variety of different types. And if we put them in a couple different categories, we can think about different ways of treating them. First and foremost, we have arm and leg wounds, extremities. These types of wounds are the most frequent cause of preventable deaths from injury. These are the types of wounds that you can take care of with direct pressure, by holding compression on top of it, or by using a tourniquet, because you can wrap the tourniquet around it. Now, this is arms and legs. The head is an extremity, but do not put a tourniquet around the neck. That's probably not the right way to take care of things. The next type that we think of is going closer to the body. You can think of starting further outside and working your way in closer to the heart. These are junctional wounds. These are things like in the armpits, in the neck, in the groin, places that you cannot put a tourniquet around just because of the geometry of what that area is. And because of that area, if you have life-threatening bleeding that's coming from there, we recommend putting pressure on top of that, but also direct packing. And we'll talk about what direct packing actually means. And then there's the types of wounds that are the closest in. These are your thoracoabdominal or your chest and your abdomen type wounds. These are the type of bleeding that cannot be treated anywhere else but at the hospital. And so what we need to do is we need to expediently get those patients out of the field and over to the hospital so that we can do something about that. Be it in the interventional radiology suite, in the operating room, or in the ICU. These are the type of injuries that we can't do too much about when we're out in the field, okay? All right, so this chain of survival that we're going to put together for the ABCs looks like this. First and foremost, ensure your own personal safety. Secondly, look for life-threatening sources of bleeding, which we just talked about. Third, is there a trauma first aid kit available? Many times there isn't, because most of you are asking, what is a trauma first aid kit? And we will get to that. And if there isn't one around, what do you do? Well, you can use any sort of clean cloth, gauze, Sometimes that means taking off the patient's clothes and using the patient's clothes. Sometimes that means taking off an outside shirt that you have and using that a piece of your own shirt to put that on top of the wound so that you can then put direct compression or pressure on top of that. Direct pressure, truly all you need, if you reduce it down to a physics problem, all you need is just a fingertip. All you need is something that is big enough to cover up what is bleeding. Let me explain that a little bit more. These blood vessels in your body, the largest one in your body is about as big as my thumb. That's your aorta, right? Everything else is smaller than that. You can have multiple blood vessels that are injured that are bleeding, but if it's just one blood vessel that's injured, if you can find where that is, all you really need to do is put enough pressure over the top of that area that you're higher than the pressure of the blood. Normal blood pressure is 120 millimeters of mercury. Can be higher, can be lower, but really that's all you have to put on top of things. However, if it's a big, messy wound, you can't really figure out where that is. And so what we recommend is putting one hand or two hands right on top of that and putting the weight of your upper body on top of that. Enough pressure to get that bleeding to stop, okay? This is most effective when we're talking about the extremities, arms and legs, and it can even stop major arterial bleeding, that spurting sort of bleeding that we were talking about. Bleeding control requires very firm pressure, and once you've put that firm pressure on, don't take it off until help arrives or until somebody else gets there. This is different from what we used to teach. Does anybody here, or did anybody here get EMS training or medic training? So back in the 1980s and coming out of, on the heels of Vietnam, there was a lot of training that you put pressure on things and after a little bit, take it off and see if the bleeding stopped. Don't do that. Just keep that pressure on. As long as you've got that bleeding under control, the patient has a fighting chance to get to the hospital. There's no need to check. There's no need to let the arm or leg have a drink. We'll sort that out when they get to the hospital, okay? Let's see, going on to the next one. All right, so in this series of pictures here, we have a good example of how to provide direct pressure over the top. In this example, the first responder has an overshirt on. They take that shirt off. They see that there's a big laceration on this person's leg. They're probably going to try and rip this into strips. If not, just bundle it up, put it straight over the wound. Try to stuff it deep down inside the wound. Don't worry about it being clean or dirty. That's my job. I get to clean things up and sort out what needs to be cleaned up after the fact. Once things are packed inside there, put your two hands on top and put the whole weight of your shoulders and your upper body into that and push down as hard as you can until the bleeding stops. All right, going back to our chain of survival, ensure your own safety. Look for life-threatening bleeding. You have life-threatening bleeding. Is there a first aid kit available? If the answer is yes, where is the wound? If the wound is on an arm or a leg or somewhere that can have a tourniquet applied to it, then we can talk about using a tourniquet. What you want to do is you want to put that tourniquet on above the area or closer to the heart than where the injury is. What are these tourniquets? Well, they're tourniquets that kind of look like this. They come in a variety of fancy colors. We've got blue ones with us today. There's some tactical black ones that we've got that some of our special forces and military professionals might recognize. There's orange ones out there. They all work the exact same way so long as they look like what you're holding in your hands. These are called combat application tourniquets. So let's go back to a little bit of history. In the Korean War and in Vietnam, what they found out is that our soldiers who had The tourniquets applied, many of them would lose their leg or arm. And that's because the tourniquets were different, and that's because the times were different. The tourniquets back then were narrower. Look at the big, thick band on these, right? This is spreading out the pressure over a greater area. The tourniquets that they were using at that time were really thin, and they were tightened down to the point where it caused this skin underneath the tourniquet to start to necrose. And also, what was the lesson in Vietnam? Well, they had to wait until helicopters got there to pick these soldiers up from the field and then fly them back to the field hospital. Sometimes it might be as many as 8 hours before that tourniquet was taken off. Fast forward to the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, when we've had new technology with these tourniquets. Over the course of the last 18 years, they have found out that there have been 0 preventable amputations from the use of tourniquets appropriately, so long as the tourniquet is put on and taken off within 2 hours to 3 hours. In an area like Cincinnati, where we have rapid EMS arrival and rapid egress from the field to the hospital, our time towards getting to someone like me or one of my colleagues is very short. So I would not worry at all about putting a tourniquet on, especially if you're like, oh, well, should I not? If you have any concern that this is a wound that you think might need a tourniquet, put it on and leave it on. Let us figure out if it needs to come out or not, okay? So how do these work? Well, they are fairly simple. They have a long band that is looped through the clasp right here. It's a Velcro band. So what you do is you will slide it on, you will slide it onto someone's arm, and you will use that band to tighten down and get all the slack out of the tourniquet. Next thing you'll notice is that it has this bar. This bar is called a windlass. And what it does is it allows you to twist and tighten the tourniquet without having to then pull it tighter. Usually as few as 3 full turns is enough to apply the tourniquet appropriately. And after you've turned it and gotten it tightened, we won't. We will later. After you turn it and tighten it all the way down, there's that C clamp in there that you can then affix the bar inside of that clamp so that it won't spin and come undone. What you'll also notice is there's this nice white Velcro strap that will go over the C clasp. This keeps the bar from accidentally flipping out and unspinning. You can imagine in the back of a ambulance, it's a bumpy ride, and if the tourniquet came undone and it was doing what it was supposed to do, that'd be a big problem. So this is a way to keep the tourniquet from coming undone accidentally. And it has a nice white space where you can then take out a marker or a pen and write down the time that you put it on so that we know how long that it's been put on for. Where do you put it? You put it above the wound. So if I had a cut on my forearm right here, I would put that tourniquet closer to my elbow than above the wound. If I had it up here above the elbow, I'd put it closer to the shoulder. Usually what we recommend is putting it about 2 to 3 inches closer to the body than where that cut is. Some of our special forces folk, when they go out into the field, I know some of them actually wear their tourniquets on so that when they do get injured out there, they will then tighten it themselves. You don't have to go high and tight. You just have to get it above where the injury is. Something to notice, you don't want to put it over an area that's a bony area. What do I mean by that? Don't put it on top of the elbow, and don't put it on top of the knee or on top of the ankle. What you want is you want it to be able to compress that soft tissue so that the bleeding stops. If you put it on top of something that's bony like that, that might actually prevent that compression from doing what it's supposed to do, which is shutting down the blood vessels in that area. And you tighten it until that bleeding stops. I want to add a little bit of a caveat to that. I want you to tighten it until you can't feel a pulse below where the tourniquet is. So if that means it's on the arm, you tighten, you tighten, you tighten, and then you check the wrist and you see if you can feel a pulse below that. If you put it on the leg, you tighten it and tighten it and tighten it, and then check the ankle. Right behind the knob of the ankle, on the inside of the ankle, is where you would find a pulse. And if you can't find the pulse there after you've tightened it, then you're good to go. I say that because arteries and veins have two different pressures. And if it was a vein that was bleeding and you just tightened it a little bit away and the vein stopped, that actually will cause the limb to swell. So you really want to tighten it until the pressure that's in the artery is shut down so that you can't feel that pulse beyond. And we'll get a chance to practice this and pair up and practice this on each other or on yourselves to see what exactly this means. Additionally, try and get it on the skin if you can. Putting this around something in your pocket, like a big bulky cell phone or something like that, is going to be putting it, just like putting it around a bone, it's going to potentially prevent it from working. Or even like some of our soldiers with their big combat knives or something like that, you take off the utility belt, make sure that things are tightened down right on top of the muscle, right on top of the skin. Okay? All right. Again, these are CAT tourniquets, combat application tourniquets. If you wanted to pick one up, they're relatively inexpensive. I got 2 of them off of Amazon. I keep 2 in the trunk of my car. There's one in my wife's car as well. In fact, we were driving down to North Carolina last summer, and it was 4 in the morning, and we saw some blinking lights on the side of the road. And she looked at me and she said, "Oh, you know, we really do have to stop. We're probably supposed to do that." So I said, "Okay, fine." And we stopped, and there was someone who was not being attended to, who was unconscious on the side of the field, and we had to put tourniquets on that patient. So it can happen. Having it nearby is the important thing. Think about this. Do you remember back to the bombing that happened at the Boston Marathon? Yeah? That was right at the finish line, right? People are running, doing the Boston Marathon, they're getting dehydrated, you know, people collapse at the end of any sort of marathon because they're so tired and everything like that. So all the medical responders are right there. Kind of, and this is a terrible way to think about things, but kind of the right place to have a whole lot of injuries. Do you know how many of the medical providers who were right there at the finish line had tourniquets with them? None. They were all back in the ambulances because that's where you put them. You put them with the utilities and stuff like that. You know, if you don't have it, you won't have it. And so having a kit nearby in the house, in the car, somewhere where you can readily access it is going to be key to having the ability to stop this life-threatening bleeding, especially from using a tourniquet. There's other sort of tourniquets out there. We recommend using the CAT tourniquets or the ones that you're seeing that you're holding on to today. We also, and this is not to say that there are other good brands or manufacturing countries out there, I would buy something that's American. I would buy something that says that it's tested, that it's not going to break, because the last thing that you want to happen is the weakest part of this tourniquet breaking. And the weakest part of this tourniquet right here is where the tourniquet is threaded through, right? And one of my partners who does work with works with Doctors Without Borders, she actually had one of these break because it was an off-brand thing when she needed it most, when she was working, I think in Sudan. Is that where Dr. Williams was? Yeah, so buy something that has good reviews. They're about $24 or so if you were going to get one. All right. We already went through all of the different parts of this, and when we do our group sessions, we can answer any sort of specific questions about how to put these together. One thing that I will say is these are also designed so that you could potentially put them on yourself. And you'll notice that when you take a look at this strap, there is a red dot on the tip of it. If you were going to put this on yourself, if you were going to tighten it yourself, the easiest thing to do is to pull it across your body. So if you think the red dot goes across your heart, so you're going to be pulling that way and then tightening things down, and then you can twist it instead of trying to pull away from you. Now, if you're talking about you're putting it on yourself for a leg injury, sure, you can pull it almost any direction, but on an arm, you probably want to pull across yourself, okay? All right. Let's see. We talked about this. We talked about the self-adhering band, removing all the slack from the tourniquet. We talked about twisting the windlass until you can't feel the pulse anymore. We talked about securing that windlass or the rod so that it's not going to come unspun. We talked about securing the C-clamp with the little wrap that goes over the top, and then also writing the time that you put it on. All right. And here we have, again, no preventable amputations have been caused by tourniquets in place that have been seen by the hospital within 2 to 3 hours of placement. The last thing that we mentioned, the variety of different colors out there. Black and yellow are the ones that you're going to encounter the most. These blue ones are actually instructional purposes ones. And so do not use a blue one. It probably has been used so many times that it might actually be weakened, damaged, and might fail on you when you need it the most. All right, the last thing we have to note is that unlike other courses that are taught, such as CPR courses, where people are unconscious when you're doing things like CPR, many times a person who has life-threatening bleeding is awake. And what happens in life-threatening bleeding, as we lose more and more blood, we get confused. And sometimes these people are not acting themselves. Sometimes they can be really agitated. Sometimes they can be combative. And we know that putting this on, putting a tourniquet on the correct way is painful. So you might have a patient who is fully conscious or semi-unconscious, and as you turn this and tighter and tighter and tighter, they will tell you it hurts. And I'm really sorry for that. But you know what? It's what has to happen. Because if it is not put on tight enough, that patient might not make it to the hospital to get saved. Okay, this is a life-saving maneuver, and it's something that you have to recognize might actually inflict pain. Common mistakes, not putting it on when you think, oh, does somebody need a tourniquet? Well, I don't know, let's just wait and see. Oh, that's not a lot of bleeding. If you're thinking about it, put it on. If you're thinking that this is a big bad wound, like something that I saw in some of these pictures, put it on. Let somebody else sort out when it needs to come off and what else needs to be done about that injury. Not making the tourniquet tight enough, and that's when you would check for your pulses in your wrist or in your ankles. What if you put a tourniquet on above the wound, tighten it all the way down, and the bleeding doesn't stop? Don't take that tourniquet off. If you have a second tourniquet, put another tourniquet on and put it a little bit higher, a little bit closer to the body than that tourniquet, and tighten it down. Oftentimes, the second tourniquet will do what the first tourniquet did not. And then there's that old school teaching of Do you take the tourniquet down and let the arm or the leg have a drink of blood? Don't do that. Once the tourniquet's on, leave the tourniquet on. Only a paramedic or a physician should take that tourniquet down, okay? All right, any sort of questions? Yes? That's you. Oh, I'm sorry, we're gonna get the microphone going.
Thank you. Is it on? Okay. Are tourniquets available in a smaller size for children? Because just with this, even around my wrist, it seemed like I couldn't get it tight enough, very close to my wrist with my small wrist, and it certainly would be too large for my grandson.
Excellent. That's an excellent question. Oftentimes, these tourniquets, they have a lot of slack in them. If you can pull out that slack and get it tight enough, then I would just use it as that. If not, the smaller the child is, the more likely you are able to just control this bleeding with direct pressure. And this is getting down into very young pediatric patients, 10, 5, even newborns if they had a life-threatening bleeding. Sometimes you can get your hand on top of that, and if direct pressure will do it, just use direct pressure. Excellent question. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Can you cause additional injury by direct pressure even though you're stopping the bleeding?
The short answer is no. The short answer is no. What you're trying to do and what we're trying to teach from a course like this is that these are the situations where the bleeding is the most immediate cause of death. If it's a question between life or limb, I think we would err on the side of life. Any sort of damage to the limb or the extremity is something that we'll have to sort out once the patient gets to the hospital, and we see ultimately how we're going to take care of this injury. Excellent question.
So really quick, one size fits all.
One size fits all.
So
That's
no
the right
small,
way to say it.
medium, large, extra large. And then I always tell people that if you're ever wavering or you're not sure whether this is life-threatening, just put it on. You are never going to hurt somebody by putting a tourniquet on them if they didn't need it, right? But if we wait too long to put the tourniquet on and they lose too much blood, we've just decreased their chance of surviving. So just put the tourniquet on. The medics will take it off. The physicians will take it off when they get to the emergency room. But you would never get in trouble and you would never hurt the patient. Okay. The leg. So we had a 17-year-old victim who came into our hospital who had been walking home from his job one evening, and there was a drive-by shooting in his neighborhood, and he caught a stray bullet to the leg, and he happened to run off behind his neighbor's house to get out of harm's way. And he was down steps in like a cellar type area. His neighbor actually happened to be an off-duty police officer who heard the gunfire, came outside and noticed the trail of blood, so he followed it back there. So about a minute into it, the first off-duty police officer responded, noticed that he was bleeding, and he was bleeding pretty profusely from an injury of some sort to the leg. He was talking to the victim, you know, hey man, where have you been shot? And the guy is saying, I've been shot in my leg. Mind you, we're about a minute and 45 seconds in when the Cincinnati Police Department shows up responding to the shooting. He shows up, he has his tourniquet on him, on his belt. He takes off the tourniquet and hands it to the off-duty police officer. At this point, the victim is starting to go in and out of consciousness because the bullet had actually severed his femoral artery and he was bleeding to death. You can bleed to death in 3 to 5 minutes if you get hit in one of those areas that Dr. Janowak mentioned. So 2 minutes in, and our victim is now going unconscious and can't tell them or point exactly where he was shot. There was so much blood, the off-duty police officer was like, I can't see a bullet hole. And you can hear Cincinnati police on the video recording say, just put the tourniquet high and tight. Just put it on as high as you can and tighten it down until you physically can't tighten it anymore because it's gonna cut off all the blood flow. So just another example of just putting it on. We'll let the medics and the physicians take care of it. So even if you don't know what the wound looks like, it's clearly a lot of blood, let's just increase their chance of survival by putting a tourniquet on. If that makes sense.
Sir, did you still have a question?
You may have answered it already, and it may sound like a selfish question, but are there any personal liabilities as a result of your trying to apply a tourniquet?
None that I know of. All of the interactions that I've been a part of, or patients that I've taken care of that have had people from the community help and take care of them, it's just been Good Samaritan law, from what I understand.
I will also say, if you come across, you are protected by the Good Samaritan law. If you come across a car crash, maybe like Dr. Janowak mentioned he and his wife did, and let's say maybe it was a drug overdose that caused that car crash, and the victim is not very compliant or welcoming of your care, and so they start to get combative. At that point, you walk away. Do not put yourself at risk.
All right. Moving on to the type of bleeding. We'll do the tourniquet practice next, or after all of this. Moving on to the type of bleeding that can't be controlled by tourniquets. So, first and foremost, ensure your own safety. Is there life-threatening bleeding? Yes, there is. Is a kit available? Yes. Where is the wound? Is it in the arm or leg? Is a tourniquet available? Sorry, where is the wound? Is it in the neck? Is it in the shoulder, armpit, groin, an area where you can't put a tourniquet? If that's the case, what do we do next? We do direct compression. So there's a number of different items out there. You can get things like combat gauze or other sort of stuff. What I would recommend, and what we use most commonly in the hospital, is actually just a rolled piece of gauze. It can almost be anything, cloth or what have you. The idea of what you're doing with some sort of gauze is that you're going to be packing it inside of a wound. There's blood coming up from some sort of a hole or some sort of a big cut or a laceration. What we're going to teach you how to do is how to pack it in tight enough so that you're going to be getting compression inside of that wound, okay? Some of these products that are out there, some of those ones like the Quick Clot or Celox or Kitaflex or Combat Gauze like we have here, these have certain amounts of like a hemostatic agent or something that's going to cause clotting to happen. But ultimately, the major effect from doing a packing type maneuver is the same for any of them, and it's the direct compression inside of a wound at one of these junctional areas. Again, groins, armpits, or neck. So what do? You expose that area, you get the clothing or anything like that off of that area so that you can see the wound itself. Get the pooled blood away from that area, but you're not trying to displace any sort of clots, because again, that patient is, their own physiology is trying to stop that bleeding. So if there's a clot there, keep that clot there and start to pack something into that wound. If you were going to be taking something like a piece of rolled gauze like this, what you would do is you would start to unroll it a little bit. And what we brought some handy dandy legs or arms. These might be really big arms if you think of it. They have a variety of different types of injuries on them, such as cuts like a knife wound or a piece of glass or something like that, or a penetrating tree branch gunshot wound, something like that. And what you'll be able to do is you'll be able to practice doing something where you're taking, oop, the Velcro has me right here. where you're taking this gauze and you're going to be packing inside this wound, and you're going to try and get it as much of that gauze inside there and as tight as possible, so that the bleeding that's rushing out of that wound is going to be staunched by that packing. Okay? What you have on the diagram up here is two different ways of things. On the top end is what we're going to be teaching, packing inside the wound. And it seems weird. And again, this is going to be something that is uncomfortable to the patient who is awake and with it. They are not going to like this. But this is important to be able to get them safe and stable to get to the hospital. The wrong way of doing it is shown on the bottom here, which is essentially using the gauze of whatever type you have and putting that just on top of the wound and holding pressure like that. Essentially, it acts like a sponge. What do sponges do? They just absorb more. And then when the sponge gets, I've seen this happen a number of times. The gauze gets all bloody, and so they take the gauze off and they put new gauze on. And it only just sponges away more of that blood. You want to get that packing deep inside there. You want it tight inside there. And then you can put direct compression on top of the packing once it's inside there. You need to do this pretty quickly when you do need to do it. Sometimes it's using one hand to hold the wound open and pack. Sometimes it's using both hands to pack deep down inside that wound. And we'll go over this in the small group sessions as well. Any questions about packing? And I know this is a little bit early. We'll be able to show this a bit more once we're going around and doing kind of small group type stuff a little bit later. All right. Yes, ma'am. Oh yeah.
Can you talk to them about impaled objects and what to do?
Yes. Sometimes we get a question about a ghastly sort of situation, a knife being in someone, right? Or if a tree branch gets penetrated inside. If there's a item that is penetrating into that wound and it's not just a superficial sort of thing, leave that in place. That might actually be doing exactly what you would want to do otherwise. That might be controlling the bleeding. And oftentimes what we do is once we get that patient to the hospital, we take them up to the operating room and we remove it up there and we see if there's bleeding that needs to be controlled. So don't remove that when you see something like that.
Do you treat a head wound the same?
A head wound, if there's active bleeding coming from there, is treated for the most part the same way. If you think about it, the head has kind of a bony shell around it, the cranial vault. And so you won't get these really deep wounds inside there. So there's not a good use for packing things up here. So the direct pressure oftentimes helps for a head wound. But somewhere along the neck, that's where you want to do these deep packing maneuvers. Good question. Absolutely. Yes, sir.
My daughter and son-in-law went for their second wedding anniversary to Urban Axes, okay? And I see this as accidents waiting to happen. It's the new fun sport. They're even considering joining a league. So I'm going, why don't you take up bowling or something like that? It sounds a lot safer. So have you had any experience with Urban Axes yet?
I have not. We have not had a patient like that I know of at Westchester yet, and I can't speak about UC. We have not had a patient from the axe throwing outing yet. Maybe from the woods, but not from the, and I don't know about you guys, not that I've
I mean, there's recreational axe work, so
Right.
work of all sorts.
Yeah.
I haven't seen anything particularly from that. I have seen lumberjack type injuries. You know, you're swing and a miss where it goes into the leg, or a chainsaw type injury or something like that. But anything can happen.
Yeah.
Scooters.
Scooters,
There you go.
scooters. There's a plug for scooters and a helmet.
Another question, sir?
Yes, say a bullet wound to the chest, or couple, 3 bullet wounds to the chest. What do you do there?
We'll get to that in just a second. So far, we've moved from our extremities out to the junctional type areas. And that actually is a perfect segue into the next area, which actually isn't covered by this course. It's those central type wounds, chest, abdomen. There's not much that you can do as a first responder in the field except for get those people to the hospital, call 911, get EMS there, and get them to us so that we can start taking care of them. Absolutely.
So this is where, like, in certain situations, hopefully you'll never be at, but for instance, the Dayton shooting, Fifth Third shooting, this is where you as a bystander will be able to help EMS when they get there by saying Gina's been shot in the chest, the abdomen, and that helps helps them then triage those patients out sooner to get to see Dr. Chris. We could put a tourniquet on the patient who's got an injured arm or leg and hold off and get those sick people, get those people out to see him. There's nothing we can do for those people outside the hospital and really outside the operating room a lot of times. This is also, go ahead.
Some kits come with, if you're shopping around for a trauma kit or a bleeding control kit, some of them will come with a chest seal, right? So we don't teach chest seals in this class, just because not a lot of people know what to do with it or how to do it. And even after we teach them, they still don't know what to do. Now your medics, when they get there, if it's needed, you know, they have the tricks and the tools that they need inside the ambulance that they would be able to take care of a sucking chest wound or something of that nature. For immediate responders, direct pressure until that help gets there.
Okay, a little bit more information. It's been, I don't know, maybe 15 years ago, and I was not really quite the first responder, but I was close. And it was a drug shooting, and the guy was shot in the chest, and I had no idea what to do. Someone was applying pressure to the chest. I think I didn't know any better, and it took several minutes for the first responders, the professional first responders, to come. So I guess the question is, rather than do nothing, I mean, what, other than call 911, is there anything we can do?
It's getting a little bit outside the scope of a course like this. In general, for a chest type wound, I would not recommend putting pressure on it. A little bit more on that. Each side of the chest has a capacity of about 3 liters. You only have 5 liters of blood in a normal adult body. So that chest can entirely fill up, and even having a hand on the outside is not going to stop any sort of the bleeding that's going on inside. It could potentially cause the lung to collapse to have that wound completely closed, especially if the wound goes into the chest. Again, that's outside of the scope of the course. This is more about tourniquet training and packing of wounds. So for chest and abdomen wounds, what I would say is get first responders and absolutely.
We need to know the limits.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I know we talked about it a little while ago. You asked about children. Tourniquets can be used on children, adult-sized children, smaller children, if they're so small, direct compression is adequate in most of the other cases. And wound packing, if the wound is that large and deep in children, is also equally effective. All right, if you get blood on you, be sure to wash it off thoroughly, soap and water. Let the first responders, the medical personnel know that you have been exposed to blood, and they will be able to kind of direct you as to what else would need to be done if something needs to be done. All right, so to backtrack a little bit, the ABCs: A, before A, make sure that you are safe. Make sure the scene is safe. Alert, call 911. B, find where that bleeding is. And then C, compress or control that bleeding, thinking about where that bleeding might be, extremities, junctional areas, or in the worst case scenario, closer to the core of the body. Okay? The only thing that is more tragic than a death is a death that could have been prevented. And with that, we will shortly break up into small groups. We've got a number of kits here. Everyone should have a tourniquet, so we'll be able to kind of go around and teach how to put the tourniquets on, practice putting those on, practice doing some packing. These are what the stop bleeding kits look like that you can purchase through the American College of Surgeons. They have things like a marker, like gloves, like one of the tourniquets that you guys are all holding right here, and some amount of gauze. If you were going to go out and make something like this on your own, Amazon is where you can get a tourniquet for about $25, $30. CVS, Walgreens, Target, any pharmacy, you can get some rolled gauze for just a couple bucks, as well as some vinyl gloves. And you can probably make a kit like this for yourself for about $30, $35. We have been installing these in and around schools in the Cincinnati area, in our hospital, in other sort of places. Soon you may actually see this as commonly as you would see something like one of those CPR or defibrillating devices. Hopefully they would have a bleeding control station and the defibrillator in the same place. Okay?
So, right. So there are different types of these bleeding control kits. And we have been, like Dr. Janowak mentioned, we have been out in the community. So if you get to fly this fall or this winter, look in the airport where their AEDs are, and you should be able to see bleeding control kits. When you're in schools or when you're at churches or community centers or businesses, look around, see if they have bleeding control kits. Because this really is a two-part class, right? You get the information, you know you're empowered, you know what to do now in the event, but do you have the supplies? So we are working really hard to get as many of these bleeding control kits out into the community. We put them in our hospital, right? Because not every area of the hospital has a crash cart. So what if something happens in the cafeteria or the waiting room or the lobby or heaven forbid the parking garage, right? So we have, actually, if you click it next, hit it one more time. So this is the bleeding control kit that we have in our hospital, right? And so inside that bleeding control kit, there are actually 8 individual bleeding control kits, and they're all connected via like a perforated strip. So if we needed to, we could grab it, rip it, and run, or grab it, rip it, and throw it if we needed to. Okay, and so like it was mentioned earlier, having this with you or on you is really what's important, right? So if I always tell people, and I laugh about this, but no matter what holiday it is, I'm like, this is the best trick-or-treating gift somebody could get in their pumpkin bucket. Or around Christmas, this is the best stocking stuffer. If you yourself, if you're on a blood thinner, your loved one's on a blood thinner, not a bad idea to have a bleeding control kit. If you like to ride a motorcycle, if you own a gun and like to go shooting at the shooting range, maybe something you want to put in your gun case. If you ride a motor, or if you like to four-wheel or hunt, or anything that puts you at risk, right, for getting injured, it's not a bad idea to have this. I have 3 young children. They give me lots of gray hair, like the one who found a pocket knife and played with it in the garage and gave himself a nice 4-inch incision on his forearm. right? So you never know when it's going to happen or where it's going to happen. So keeping them with you in your car, in your camper, wherever it is, in your purse, ladies, is really, really important. And again, they're pretty cheap and easy to make.
All right, let's start getting some group things going. I didn't realize that we're at about 8:15 already.
I just wanted to add that I've been tasked with getting some active shooter training for my office area. And part of the reason I came to this is because it seems silly just to have active shooting training without anything
Sure.
to do. If God forbid it actually happens, we should have something like this in the office too.
And so really quick, we're going to break into 3 groups. But before I do, I just want to mention that this training is a training that we offer everywhere, anywhere in the Cincinnati area for free. So if you are interested in having this training or us come to a location, come see me after class. I'll give you my information. You can contact me. We will get it set up. Okay? All right, so we are going to practice. We're going to start with the tourniquets. Everybody can do it at their seat. Since everybody has a tourniquet, we'll put it on ourselves first, and then we will go and you can turn to your neighbor or your friend or your least favorite person in this room and you can put it on them, okay? All right. All right, so I'm going to just walk you through while everyone's doing it, okay? So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to insert your extremity through that tourniquet. Okay. And then you're going to pull it really tight and make sure when you're pulling it, you're pulling closer to their skin. So not way down here. You want to pull it nice and tight right here. And you should be pinching the arm fat. You want to get it so tight you can barely get your finger between the tourniquet and the victim's skin, right? Okay, so nice and tight. Pull towards yourself and then wrap under your arm. So right now, there's no reason to pull it through the clip just yet. So notice on mine, it's just hanging there, all right? But the Velcro's strong, it's holding it in place. The blood flow should already be slowed down because of how tight just this alone is. Now we're gonna crank that rod. Remember, when you crank that rod, it's gonna hurt. So let the victim know that you're about to inflict some pain on them. Doesn't matter, clockwise, counterclockwise, it works the same. And the amount of times that you twist it is going to depend on how big that injury is, right? So it could be 1 twist to cut the pulse off, could be 3 twists. So for training purposes, feel free to only twist it once. And then stick it inside that clip. And you want to make sure it's all the way inside that clip, sitting all the way inside that clip, okay? Once your rod is nice and secure inside that clip, technically the bleeding is controlled, right? Because we no longer have a pulse. We want to secure this tourniquet down now. So take that strap that we left hanging there and pull it through the clip as well, over that rod. So as you can see how I just pulled that through, okay, right over the rod. So now the rod and the strap are inside that clip. Perfect. All right, once they're both in there, take that little white strap, cover that opening up. So pull your strap through the clip. Remove the white thing. Now pull that through the clip. Yep, try to get it through the clip if you can, not just over it, because if this piece gets caught on something, let's say, well, it's Velcro, so it'll stick to carpet, it'll stick to sweaters, it can get caught in the side rail. You do not want this to come off because even though the rod is twisted, if the Velcro comes loose, the tourniquet comes loose and you start bleeding again, okay? So rod and strap underneath, perfect, perfect. You can take it off, yes, that's great. Now either put it on a different area on your body or put it on somebody else, just to make sure that you guys are doing it correctly. You would expect that extremity to turn purple, ash gray almost, right? Because you do not have a pulse in that extremity. There is no blood flow. So that is what we would expect for it to look like, okay? the rod in first and then pull it through like
Okay,
that.
okay, gotcha. Okay.
Do you know how to do it? Well, wait, let me turn that off.
All right, when you have finished, we are gonna go ahead and practice the packing aspect of it now. So we're gonna bring some limbs around, we'll put them on the chairs, and you guys can actually practice packing the wound and seeing what it feels like to get way down deep in there. Again, keep in mind, if we're packing a wound, it's because it's very deep, right? So you're probably gonna be touching those bones and the muscles and all that nice and gooey stuff, okay? So pack as deep as you can, as quick as you can, and then you're going to apply pressure on top. So we will be around with these fancy arms and legs, and everybody can get a chance to pack.